The Pacific Ocean didn't salute anyone. It rolled against the jagged cliffs below Fort Resolute. Indifferent to rank ribbons or stories men told about themselves in bars after midnight waves rose and broke. Pulled only by gravity and the moon, never by ego, Fort Resolute sat on a shelf of concrete and steel bolted into the rock. A joint special operations facility where Navy, Marines, and a handful of other units trained for missions that officially didn't exist. Operator candidates ran along the upper deck in weighted vests, boots thudding in rhythm with the distant thrum of helicopters from the air. The place looked like an anthill built by people who believed in war the way others believed in religion that morning. A new figure stepped onto the main training terrace overlooking the ocean. Major Elena Voss, United States Marine Corps, paused at the edge of the mat area. Hands clasped behind her back, she wore standard-issue utilities, sleeves neatly rolled. Dark hair twisted into a bun so tight, it might as well have been armor at 5'7", lean and wiry. She looked more like a distance runner than a wrecking ball. Most of the operators milling nearby barely registered her presence. A few glanced over, classified her as some Marine officer, and went back to stretching, talking, or silently rehearsing their next evolution. The whispers that had gone around that morning: new Marine arriving, some kind of close-quarters expert. Joint program crap had already dissolved into background noise. Lena didn't seem to notice the indifference. Her gaze moved over the marked combat lanes, the crash mats, the weapon racks, the clusters of SEAL candidates circling like restless sharks. She wasn't admiring the view, she was measuring it from the upper catwalk. Commander Ryder Callahan, United States Navy SEALs, watched the Marine officer like she'd stepped into his living room without knocking. The salt wind tugged at his short-cropped hair as he leaned on the railing, arms folded, expression carved from habit and disdain. This was his domain, his training deck, his candidates, his culture. Had 6 combat tours behind him and a reputation that ran through the special warfare community like electrical wire tough, uncompromising, brutally effective to the young operators below. Callahan wasn't just a commander. He was proof that surviving the impossible could turn a man into a myth. He received the memo 2 weeks ago. Marine Corps major attached to Fort Resolute to develop joint close-quarters integration curriculum. He hadn't opened the attached file. He'd seen the name Voss. Elena M. seen the rank, seen the words integration program, and filed the whole thing under political theater. He had missions to plan and candidates to break in. He wasn't about to redesign his training around somebody else's experiment. Now she stood on his deck, silently mapping out his lanes like she had a right to them. Callahan straightened and descended the metal stairs. Boots ringing on steel, conversations around the mats dropped a notch as operators tracked him. Command presence followed him like a shadow. People reacted before he said a word. He stopped a few feet from Elena. She turned toward him. Posture neither deferential nor confrontational. Just present ready. This area is restricted, Callahan said. Voice crisp enough to cut rope special warfare candidates. Only that sign. He jerked his chin toward a posted placard. Isn't a suggestion? Her eyes flicked to the sign, then back to him. Understood. Sir, she didn't move. A slight shift of Callahan's jaw was the only sign he'd noticed her lack of retreat. The operators nearest the mat sensed tension forming. The way experienced fighters sensed a storm before the first drop of rain. A few eased closer, without appearing to move at all. I don't know what they told you at HQ, Callahan said, stepping into the space where people usually backed up, but we don't bring observers onto this deck during live evolutions, especially not ones sent to tweak our training structure for optics. His tone made the word observers sound like parasites. Someone in the cluster behind him snorted softly, more out of nervous habit than actual amusement. Lena studied his face for a half-second. No blush, no flare of anger, no brittle smile, just quiet calculation. I'm not here to tweak your structure, Commander, she replied evenly. I'm here under joint directive to develop applicable close-quarters protocols for cross-branch use. This facility was designated as the pilot site. Callahan's eyes narrowed fractionally. You read that off a memo? No, she said. I wrote that memo that earned a few sidelong glances. The moment stretched Callahan. Could have ended it there. Asked for her orders. Confirmed her clearance. Done the professional thing instead. He felt the weight of watching eyes. The pull of something more primitive than procedure. He turned away from her and faced the assembled candidates. "Fine," he said, voice lifting so the whole deck heard him. "If the major wants to see close quarters training, we'll give her a demonstration." Hands on a murmur moved through the group. Petty Officer Barnes. Callahan barked front and center. Now Petty Officer Logan Barnes broke from the line of SEAL candidates with the eager stride of a man who'd finally been offered something more interesting than drills. Shoulders like bulkheads, he moved with the condensed weight of functional muscle. Not gym vanity, his forearms were roped with veins, his neck thick, his eyes bright with the kind of confidence that came from never losing badly enough to remember. "I've stepped onto the central mat." Rolled his shoulders once and glanced at Alina with open curiosity and a hint of apology. He hadn't created the situation. He'd just been handed it. Callahan gestured lazily between them. "Major, since you're so invested in understanding our combat training, you'll participate. Barnes will show you what controlled aggression looks like. Candidates, observe, this is how we deal with unknowns in close quarters." Barnes swallowed. "The first crack in his relaxed posture. Rules of engagement, sir?" he asked carefully. "Non-lethal, full contact." Callahan replied, "Demonstrate a decisive takedown. Make it clear." Subtle ripple went through the watching group. They understood the subtext. This wasn't about technique. It was about hierarchy, about proving who owned this space. Alina stepped forward without hesitation, boots whispering over the mat. She faced Barnes, her stance deceptively neutral, feet shouldered width, hands loose at her sides, weight sunk low like she'd rooted herself to something deeper than rubber padding. "You don't have to prove anything," Barnes murmured under his breath, eyes never leaving hers. "Neither do you," she answered. Quietly, Callahan folded his arms. Expression cold. "Begin." Barnes circled first. Testing range, he raised his hands, fingers loose. Posture halfway between boxing and grappling. He'd been through hundreds of sparring sessions, dozens of full contact demonstrations. He knew how to go hard without breaking people. He also knew how to lose theatrically when rank required. Eth didn't intend to lose. Stepped in with a probing jab, more a rangefinder than a strike, watching her reaction. Elena's response was almost imperceptible, a shift in her ribcage, a subtle rotation of her torso. The punch skimmed past empty air. Barnes reset. Surprised by how little she seemed to move, he feinted high, dropped his level, and drove forward for a body clinch, intending to wrap her, lift, and plant her on her back hard enough to make Callahan happy, and the lesson memorable. She didn't retreat. She stepped into him, her right hand slid to his wrist, not grabbing, just guiding. Her left forearm brushed across his triceps, adding a directional nudge that his own momentum amplified. Her hips pivoted, spine straight, feet cutting across the mat in a precise arc. His center of gravity left him before he understood why. For an instant he was weightless, his body folding over an invisible ledge. Then the mat crashed up into his shoulder and back in a heavy thud that echoed across the deck. His breath left in a sharp grunt. Elapsed time, roughly 6 seconds. Alina remained standing, one knee bent, hand still lightly in contact with his wrist. In perfect position to transition into a joint lock. She didn't apply. She simply released him and stepped back. Silence rolled across the deck like a new kind of waving. The ocean seemed quieter for a moment. No one spoke, not Callahan, not the instructors, not the line of SEAL candidates who had just seen one of their strongest operators thrown to the mat like physics had changed its mind. Barnes pushed himself up on one elbow, blinking as if he'd woken from a short, violent dream. His pride wasn't wounded. His body wasn't injured. What was shaken was something deeper. The internal equation that had always told him size equaled outcome. He gave Alina a slow nod, not offended, not impressed, just recalibrated. Clannon, however, didn't recalibrate. He stared at Alina like she had broken a rule he hadn't fully defined yet. "You slipped him," Callahan said flatly. "Lucky. Angle happens sometimes." Alina agreed, neutral, non-combatant, in tone that annoyed him more than defiance would. Heavy gestured for Barnes to stand down, then turned his sharp eyes to the crowd. "You all saw what happens when someone stops thinking and lets momentum get away from them," he added quickly, reframing history before it could settle. This wasn't technique, this was Barnes getting lazy. Some of the operators nodded automatically. No one really believed it. Barnes stepped to the side, still catching his breath. watching Alina now with detached professional curiosity. The way you watch someone who's speaking a language you've heard before but never understood. Till now, Callahan's jaw tightened. Well, Major, he continued, voice carrying a thin edge. Maybe that little parlor trick works in a controlled space, but this isn't a demo room. This is a combat facility. He spread his hands slightly, and our people don't learn from parlor tricks. Alina looked at him. For a beat too long, you're right, she said. They learn from pressure, something in the air. Change stand. Everyone felt it. Callahan shifted his stance. He didn't notice it. But several operators did a small adjustment in his footing, a defensive subconscious movement. He masked it by turning to his lead combat instructor, Chief Navarro, he called. Gesturing Navarro wasn't Barnes' different kind of weight, different kind of danger, lean, tactical, surgical. A man. Didn't hit hard. Just accurately, he stepped forward without hesitation. Eyes unreadable. What are we doing, sir? Navarro asked calmly, validating. Callahan replied, Major Voss seems to believe leverage replaces intent. Let's test that theory. Alina stepped back onto the mat without being asked this. Navarro tilted his head slightly. Rules. Engagement. Callahan said, fast resolution. Take control. Navarro gave one nod. And then something interesting happened. He didn't rush her. He didn't posture. He observed first mirroring. They moved in slow orbit for a second, both waiting for the other to reveal preference, bias, hesitation, but Alina had trained past preference. Navarro shot in low, clean. Professional discipline. She didn't block. She adjusted the angle of entry by 3 degrees. It was enough. His grip slid. His foot placement faltered. She didn't throw him. She displaced him enough to break balance, enough to end it without violence. Navarro countered immediately, switching approach. Attempting an inside rebut, she stepped through, rode the motion, rotated, and pinned his arm without force. 1. Pressure point. 1 breath. He froze, realizing. He tapped once, then actually smiled clean. This had not flattery assessment behind him. A couple of candidates exchanged looks. Callahan didn't look impressed. He looked disturbed, as if he'd just realized he wasn't in control of his own narrative anymore. This isn't a dance floor. Callahan snapped, and this isn't theater. His voice carried sharper now. He walked closer to the mat, close enough that the candidates could smell the aftershave he'd chosen carefully that morning, close enough that space itself felt commanded. You're demonstrating technique, he continued, looking directly at Alina now. But combat doesn't respect technique. It respects who imposes first. He turned abruptly to the candidates. You want to learn what real force does to refine movement? Watch closely. His finger stabbed toward the mat. Strike her down. A murmur broke. Some operators shifted on their feet. A few looked uncertain. Navarro glanced sideways. Full contact? He asked. Callahan didn't blink. Full intent, he replied. Not a showcase. End at something. Icy traveled across the deck. This wasn't demonstration territory anymore. This was ego with rank. Alina didn't react outwardly. No visible tension, no flare of temper. She just looked at Navarro, exhaled once, not in anger. In honesty, he stepped forward slowly. I'm not going to hurt you, he said under his breath. You won't, she replied. He didn't know how. True, that already was. Callahan's voice cut through now. Navarro moved, not aggressive, decisive, and the first thing he realized was that she wasn't retreating at all. Navarro struck in with speed, not reckless. Not heavy, precise, say mid-level insertion, followed by shoulder control. Designed to dominate vertically before transitioning to ground text. Bukalina let him get close. So close that his knuckles brushed fabric. Then she vanished from his alignment, not by sprinting back, by pivoting through his blind angle. He felt a sudden absence of resistance, the sort that tricks the body into overcommitting. Then something impossible happened. Sheer touched his elbows and telebredridged his arm, extended a fraction to far. His balance shifted a fraction to latent gravity. Noticed first, he dropped, not slammed, lowered by his own machinery, like a door easing shut instead of being kicked in. She controlled him on the descent, not to dominate, but to ensure the landing was an injury. His face hit surprise before the mat caught him. He didn't resist after he just stared up at her for a moment, breathing harder than expected. Then another tap. Voluntary admitted. The entire deck was silent again, but this silence was different. It Wasn't shock anymore, it was recalculation. Callahan stared at the scene. Fisk shedded, meant to end something instead. Something else had just begun. A new voice cut through the stillness. Commander Callahan. Not angry, not loud, but impossible to ignore. Everyone turned. Colonel Marcus Rhine, Joint Operations Liaison Officer, stood at the entrance of the deck. Hands behind his back, uniform crisp, expression unreadable. He held a secured tablet, sir, Rhine continued. Stepping forward, I believe protocol has been exceeded. Callahan straightened slightly, training discretion. He replied, within my facility. Rhine held up the tablet. The facility is joint funded. The training evolution is under cross-branch mandate, and the officer you've been interacting with isn't here for demonstration. He walked closer and, for the first time, the room leaned in. She's here to audit your methodology, Commander, and to determine whether this base continues hosting joint programs. Callahan frowned. Alina Voss, Rhine added, pressing the tablet into Callahan's hands. Field Strategic Lethal Integration Specialist. Marine Corps? He paused. Assigned here because of an incident 5 years ago. Callahan's eyes scanned, then stopped, then froze, because the name inside the old report, the one he'd approved, rewritten, buried, had just come back. Standing in front of him, live silent, waiting. Callahan didn't move after taking the tablet. His thumb hovered over the screen, as if confirming. The letters might rearrange themselves into something safer. They didn't. Vos. Alina M. Roll. Extraction Corridor Defensive Operator. Siege Delta Operation Archived. Status. Commendation postponed. Report. Reclassified by Command Authority. His name was stamped at the bottom as approving officer. He hadn't expected that. Not here, not now. Not in front of 40 operators and an entire command structure. He lifted his eyes slowly to her. For the first time since she arrived, he looked at her not as an intrusion, not as a test case, not as a nuisance, but as a variable he had never calculated for. She met his gaze without hostility, without victory, just acknowledgement. Colonel, Callahan said finally, voice lower, cooled by something he didn't have a word for yet. This facility operates under live effect discretion given certain threat modeling parameters. Colonel Rhine didn't smile. And Major Voss operates under Joint Review and Operations Authority for those exact same parameters. He replied, you overruled a watch-only analyst and turned this into a contact scenario. I was validating performance. Callahan replied. Rhine angled his head slightly. You were validating dominance. There's a difference. Eyes were on them now. Instructors, candidates, support staff, not because of Alana, because of what the system had just acknowledged. Rhine pressed a command onto the tablet. A secure document unfolded on the screen. All joint program activity at Fort T. Resolute is now temporarily under my oversight until review completion, he announced. Callahan didn't react outwardly, but the atmosphere changed, not through authority shifting, but because buried history had just surfaced and it recognized Hera 5 years earlier. The operation had been marked as Siege Delta, neutralized to the outside world. It was just another red line, disappearing from an unnamed map inside the classified corridors of Joint Command. It had another meaning: a night of failing angles, a corridor littered with collapse, a compromised evacuation channel that hadn't been reopened. Alina Voss had been assigned as rear perimeter cover, last in, first forgotten. The report had mentioned her once and removed her twice. Callahan remembered the page revisions, the cascade of edits, the phone calls from above telling him to keep command central and the narrative clean. He had justified it easily. Back then, he'd told himself hierarchy depended on clarity. Lower rank contributors disappeared all the time in complex operations. Now, the contributor stood 10 feet away watching him. Remember, Rhine's voice broke into the quiet. Major Voss has provided unedited operational telemetry from that corridor. He announced footage, logs, and situational audio. A projector flickered to life on the adjacent concrete wall. Grainy night vision footage filled it. Dust muzzle flash crumbled corners of a half-fallen structure. Someone shouted. Doors overlapped. Then her voice came through, clear, flat. 2 down, 1 unconscious. Corridor is not compromised. I hold. Callahan's lips tightened. The footage cut to show 2 operators being dragged through debris. Her hands Covered in ash, not shaking, she didn't look heroic on screen, she looked procedural, and that made it heavier. The footage played in fragment high pressure minutes, compacted into silent judgment. No music, no editing, just raw observation, a joint medic pinned behind rubble, suppressed corridor shadows moving where walls should have been, and then his own voice. All remaining units, exfil immediately returned to zone black. A pause, then her response. Out. 2 operators in recovery state, corridor stable. I'm holding silence. Then his order again, sharper. That's a direct command. The camera shook, not from fear, from incoming vibration, noted. She answered and didn't move. The next 45 minutes of footage compressed across the screen, her repositioning, her controlled bursts, her relocation across collapsed concrete, the way she framed angles that didn't exist before she shaped. Then no one spoke while it played because story had just replaced narrative. There was no drama in it, just function re-muted the projector. And in the final report, he said, controlling his voice tightly, her action was reduced to auxiliary engagement assist. He looked directly at Callahan. Do you want to explain that to your candidates? The room didn't feel heated, it felt surgical. Callahan inhaled calmly, then nodded once. As soon as we finished this session, he didn't deny it, not any more later that afternoon. Inside the command briefing room, there was no shouting, no slamming doors, no courtroom theatrics, just structured conversation with sharp edges. Elena sat across from Callahan and Colonel Ryan, hands resting loosely on the table, posture straight but not defensive for the first time. She spoke more than a sentence. I didn't bring the footage for revenge. She said I brought it because the next operation might not have someone stubborn enough to stay. Callahan listened, not as a commander, as a man reconstructing. An old decision with new consequences, I believed. Reducing fragmentation in reports prevented operational instability. He admitted, I didn't see the cost of that reduction from the ground level. You couldn't. She replied, why not file formal objection back then? Ryan asked. She considered it because back then, I wasn't assigned authority to object. She said I was assigned to hold a corridor. She didn't accuse him. She didn't plead. She just described. Callahan looked at her again this time. Without dominance, without dismissal, just recognition of a truth he should have processed long ago. Joint Command isn't here to discipline past fear. Ryan said, finally, we're here to rewrite future protocol. He slid a new file across the table. Major Voss. Here to lead a cross-branch tactical integration pilot starting next month. Fort Resolute will be the first implementation zone. She didn't look surprised. She just nodded outside. The ocean kept working the cliffs like it had for centuries inside. A different erosion had begun. The command staff stood in silence as Ryan made his final announcement for Resolute will undergo evaluation for command structure recalibration. Not punitive, corrective. Eyes shifted. Callahan's included. He absorbed it without protest. Ryan turned slightly toward Elena. Your role isn't symbolic. He added, and it's not a publicity maneuver. I wouldn't accept it if it were. She answered calmly. Good. He replied, because the next phase will test more than physical skill. It will challenge outdated hierarchy. Callahan finally spoke again. Will you allow me to observe your program? He asked her not. Command tone, not pride, just question. She didn't answer immediately. She studied him, not with judgment. Not with forgiveness, with professional calibration if you come to learn. She said not to control. He nodded once, not agreement, acknowledgement. Outside the briefing room, several instructors watched through the glass walls. They'd expected punishment. They'd witnessed transition instead, and that unsettled them more than discipline ever could, because consequences felt finite. Change did not. Fort Resolute's training bay had hosted thousands of drills, but none like this. No banners, no speeches, no symbolic diversions. Just 40 operators standing in silence as Elena Voss walked past them, evaluating not posture, but awareness. She didn't start with exercises. She started with stillness. Close your eyes. She said. Some hesitated, most obeyed. You will identify the person nearest you without sight, based only on sound displacement and breathing rhythm. Confusion rippled, but she didn't explain further. She didn't believe in over-explaining. Foots moved, a shuffly controlled disturbance. Now identify one by one. They named wrong height, wrong spacing, wrong proximity. She let them fail, then she spoke. You rely on vision because it's easy. Combat removes easy before it removes life. The next 4 hours dismantled instincts they'd spent years building. She stripped down their dependence on brute reaction, replacing it with spatial attunement, proximity calculations, peripheral listening, pressure sensing by midday. No one was arguing by late afternoon. Even the skeptics were quiet. Callahan watched from the upper observation deck, not with authority, with an unsettling sense of being unarmed in a room with someone redesigning his architecture. The first real disruption came from operator Riggsy. Had reputation decorations, classified commendations, and a go built on survival. You're teaching hesitation, he said after a close-quarters scenario in real contact. Hesitation gets people killed. She stepped closer. He expected pushback, correction, defensiveness instead. She asked, in your last engagement, how many seconds did you have before deciding? He frowned too. Maybe 3. How many threats eliminated? She continued. 3. Confirmed. Then hesitation didn't kill you. She replied calmly, unawareness. Did silence fell over the floor. Then she reset the scenario. This time, she didn't. Increased speed. She reduced it. She forced controlled pacing, delayed reactions, measured responses. At first, their performance dropped, then it stabilized, then it improved by evening. Riggs approached her again, but his tone had changed. It's not hesitation, he admitted. It's controlled delay. It's space, she said. Riggs nodded. I've never had anyone teach space before. She didn't respond. She didn't need to that night. Callahan remained in his office long after command lights went dark. He replayed footage of her sessions, the discipline, the absence of dominance. Quiet reconstruction of how his facility thought, built Fort Resolute on strength, aggression, speed on now. He was watching it evolve through restraint and precision. His terminal chimed a message from Joint Oversights U. Rescheduled for psychological operations. Recalibration stared at it, not with resistance, but something heavier, participation for the first time in 22 years. He didn't feel like a commander. He felt like a variable, and it disturbed him more than any external threat had ever managed. He walked to the observation window below. Voss was still on the mat with 2 exhausted operators, correcting a minor foot angle. She hadn't left yet, hadn't rested, hadn't celebrated, just worked in. He realized something was sharp. Clarity. He hadn't misjudged her strength. He misjudged his own understanding of what strength actually was. In the 4th day, Ryan arrived unannounced with joint evaluation executives. No prior notice, no preparation. This wasn't a performance audit, it was a reality intrusion simulated. Extraction collapse, he announced. Live cognitive pressure event. No warnings. The environment changed, instantly. Lighting, drop, sound cues, distorted, timed. Stressors activated across the facility. Class froze for half a second, and then Voss spoke, not faster, calmer. They moved. No screaming, no chaos, just controlled motion inside artificial disorder. Even the evaluators were silent because for the first time, they weren't watching performance, they were witnessing adaptation. When it ended, one executive leaned toward Ryan. She's not just training them, he whispered. She's altering operational behavior. Ryan nodded. That was always the intention. The next morning, an official memorandum circulated across Joint Command. Fort Resolute Pilot, Phase 1. Approved for system-wide expansion. No announcement was made, no media briefing, just quiet institutional movement inside the training bay. Alina Voss stood watching the class stretch in silence. Callahan approached. He stopped 2 meters away, not out of authority, out of respect. You changed how they think in 4 days, he said. She didn't look at him. I didn't, she replied. I just removed what was blocking it. He exhaled, then asked, and what blocks command? She finally turned slightly. Fear of losing control, she said, and the mistaken belief that control is stability. Callahan absorbed that in silence. Across the bay, the operators resumed drills, no longer divided by gender, background, origin, just function, just coordination, just execution. And the system, quiet, slow, resistant, shifted a few degrees in the right direction, not because it wanted to, but because it had no choice. The official evaluation document reached 6 different branches before noon, not because of urgency, because no one wanted to sign it without knowing who else had already seen it. The language was precise and emotional, but the implications cut deep. Major Alina Voss has demonstrated quantifiable restructuring of operator cognitive response, under high-pressure operational simulation. Current methods indicate a necessary doctrinal update for all close-quarters training divisions. It wasn't praise, it was validation, 2 words no one had expected to see applied to her strategic catalyst within hours. Secondary facilities requested integration. Slots not for publicity, for survival optimization. Callahan read the report twice. In his office, not because he needed to understand it, because he needed to understand what it meant to him. His name was listed not as a decision maker, but as facility commander, under transition oversight. Could have resisted that wording, many would, but he did. Enclosed the document and stood in silence. Sometimes losing authority was the same thing as gaining awareness. That evening he found her alone inside the practice bane, not training, not demonstrating, just standing, hands clasped behind her back, eyes tracing the geometry of the mat like someone reading a language only they understood. You never asked for recognition, he said. She didn't. Turn recognition wasn't withheld. Because I didn't ask, she replied. It was withheld because it was inconvenient, and now, he asked, now it's necessary. She said, not for her, for what followed after her. He exhaled slowly. I should have seen it earlier. Yes, she answered. No cruelty in it, just fact. He nodded once. I won't interfere with the next phases, he said. She finally glanced at him. You shouldn't, she replied, because what's coming next? Challenges the system more than me, she said, and it's not built to like. That he almost smiled. Almost resistance didn't arrive with yelling or open defiance. It arrived through small changes, delayed approvals, reduced scheduling, administrative friction, institutional hesitation dressed as procedure. But Voss built for friction. She didn't react. She documented every delay, every obstruction, every policy wall disguised as protocol. Within 3 weeks, her logs were thicker than the opposition's excuses, and Ryan saw them. You anticipated this, he said. Yes, she replied. You prepared counters. Yes, you expected retaliation. No, she corrected. I expected resistance to change that makes people accountable. Pause. Then he nodded. Authorized direct command bypass. 3 months later, Fort Resolute no longer functioned the same. It didn't feel like her facility. It felt like something that had outgrown. The finger that pointed at new instructors had arrived. Men and women trained under the revised doctrine. Old ones adjusted or reassigned them. Atmosphere had shifted. Less noise, more focus. The operators moved differently now, not aggressive, not passive, just intentional. Callahan watched from the sun desk, hands folded, expression unreadable. He wasn't in control anymore. For the first time in years, he wasn't pretending either. Voss stood on the floor, giving no speech, no announcement, just a single statement. Efficiency isn't loud, it's precise. The archive registered the original incident under a new classification: command failure, reversal event, training doctrine. Realignment, a simple phrase, but inside it lives 6 seconds. Seconds where a voice commanded destruction and discipline responded with transformation. Years from now, recruits would hear about that moment, not dramatized, not exaggerated, just explained. They wouldn't remember Callahan as the man who ordered her. Strook, they'd remember him as the commander who didn't stop what came after. They wouldn't remember Voss as the woman who stood alone. They'd remember her as the architect of how they survived in somewhere between buried reports and rewritten history. Those 6 seconds would remain unchanged, not because they were dramatic, but because they were true, not loud, not celebrated, just real.